Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. So picture it, it's dark outside, you wake up, frost is still crunchy under your boots. Chickens are looking at you like, don't look at us, we're not producing at the moment, dead of winter for us. Nobody's thrilled about getting out of bed. The garden looks like, nothing growing. Even the dogs, Luna is the exception, our Miramar, but even the dogs are saying, do we really have to get up? Roxy, our little Kelpie, she won't budge off the veranda when it's cold like this. Winter has settled in properly. And if we're being honest, this time of year can be really hard for farming and homesteading. The days are short, the garden's not producing much, everything feels slow. But thousands of years before supermarket, electricity, streaming services, all the rest of it, people looked at this time very, very differently. They saw it as a turning point. And that's because this part of the year, winter solstice, was referred to as Yule. Now, different countries called it different things, but it was a pagan festival that celebrated the dead of winter. And when I say the dead of winter, it celebrated winter solstice, which is a turning point where we come out the other side to the return of lighter days and longer days. So we're talking about Yule on the homestead and the traditions behind it and why it still matters and how you can celebrate it with some meaningful seasonal kind of rituals with your family without spending a fortune. CJ here from Mojo Homestead, and on this episode of Ditch the Store, we are talking all things Yule. So before we get started, don't forget we have a mailing list, and that mailing list gets notified of things before anybody else. If you're not already on it, the links will be in the show notes. Head along, sign up, get a freebie. I've got a couple of freebies on there. Get a freebie, join the mailing list, and you'll be notified of things before anybody else. You'll be one of our special people, one of our friends. So what is Yule? Most people have heard of Christmas, but and sometimes people think about Yule as in a Yule log, but they don't necessarily know what it is. Yule is one of the oldest winter celebrations in the Northern European traditions, and my background is Scottish, Irish, English, with a little bit of, we think a little bit of Scandinavian thrown in for the kids. So Northern European is, for us, is our normal heritage. So historically, it was celebrated around winter solstice, and it marked the longest night of the year. So the period of time where the daylight is the shortest during the day, therefore the nighttime is the longest. But the thing about the longest part of the day, longest night of the year is that the next day, the nights start getting shorter, which means the days get longer. And that's what Yule was supposed to be for. It was a celebration of we've made it through that longest night of the year, and now every night from here on onwards is going to get shorter. So the important thing is that we're not talking about religion. And if you're religious, I love that everybody has faith, but it's important to recognize our history too without blanket kind of putting it to the side. So when Christianity spread across Europe, it often absorbed and reinterpreted some existing festivals rather than trying to eliminate them outright. Before Christianity, there were a lot of Germanic and Norse people who celebrated Yule. I think in Old Norse it was Jul. It's spelt with a J-O-L rather than the way that we spell it, which is Y-U-L-E. And it was around the winter solstice. Now, it wasn't always celebrated as a single day, so it's not just necessarily Yule as winter solstice, that particular day that is the longest night. It was more of a festival, seasonal festival that lasted several days, in some places several weeks, around that winter period of the longest night. Now, some common Yule traditions are feasting. Usually meat or root vegetables are very common, and that would be because during that winter period, that might have been all that was available. Your fruits and things like that, if they couldn't be preserved or kept for a long period of time, the plants wouldn't have been producing. So it makes sense that it would be root vegetables and meat because they would be things that would be available during that period of time. Drinking and gathering, so festivals to get together, and that probably had a bit to do with the fact that there wasn't a lot else to do. Farm work would have been at a minimum because the days, the ground wouldn't have been producing much. A lot of these areas would have been covered in snow, so you wouldn't have been able to produce anything. Most people would have been bunkered down for their annual leave break over winter, much like the molting chickens we discussed last week. Honouring ancestors. So some areas were big into honouring their ancestors during that period. Bonfires and fires. Makes sense if it's the dead of winter and freezing cold and snowy. That makes sense that they would have fires, hence the Yule Log. Evergreen celebrations. Obviously, it would have had to have been any plants that were evergreen because, deciduous plants in the dead of winter would have lost all their leaves. And celebrating the return of the sun after the longest night, which included some gift giving in some regions. And that tradition has varied across areas and different time periods, but it was pretty much the same. There was a festival to celebrate the return of the light. When Christianity arrived, Christian missionaries faced a pretty practical problem, and this goes for a lot of pagan festivals that I talk about through the year. I mention these at the times that they're on. People were very deeply attached to their seasonal celebrations. They enjoyed them. Who wouldn't? Drinking wine and eating meat and sitting around a bonfire. That's my idea of heaven. Rather than banning everything, the church got smart and they overlaid Christian meaning onto existing festivals. So for Northern Hemisphere, which is Northern Europeans, where Yule is a base tradition, that is in the dead of winter, which is usually around the 25th of December. Ringing any bells, anybody? So Christmas was eventually fixed as the 25th of December, even though the Bible doesn't give a date for the birth of Jesus. Honestly, I've asked people who are deeply into their Christianity, and while everybody likes to think that that's the date, anybody who's true to their history knows that we don't actually have a date for the birth of the person called Jesus. So 25th of December was settled on as the birth of Jesus. For those not watching on YouTube, I am doing the inverted commas. So by early medieval periods, many Yule customs and Christmas customs had merged together across Northern Europe. Things that we still associate with Christmas that actually have Yuletime roots. And many historians believe these traditions were very pre-Christian, and Yule influences are your evergreen trees and branches, like we said, Yule logs burning through the middle of the winter, like the longest night. You want the fire to be roaring because it's so cold. Candles and lights during the darkest part of the year. Makes sense that you would have had to light candles because it was the darkest night of the year. And if you're only getting 4 hours sunlight in parts of there's some parts of Scandinavia that, have the midnight, they have no sun during the middle of winter. So they would have had to have candles going all the time to see what they were doing. Midwinter feasting, because, it's cold and you probably need to stay warm, and a good way to stay warm thermogenically is to eat meat and root vegetables. It puts on a little bit of weight, but you're able to, thermodynamically, is that a word? Keep yourself warm. Gift-giving traditions, which was a part of Yuletime festivals in some places, and large family meals. Now, think about it. If we go back to Northern European middle of winter, so December, you would have all been crammed into one space anyway, because it would have been snowy, icy, dark outside for most of the time during that bulk winter period. And therefore you would have had to have large family meals because everybody would have been shoved into the same house eating together, it's not like you could just go, I'm just going to walk over to so-and-so's house when there's, 2 meters of snow and, it's pitch black outside and freezing cold. You would have stayed indoors. So the modern Christmas tree is an example of those evergreen trees that developed much later in Christian Germany, but the use of evergreen in winter celebrations predates Christianity. So, and I'm sorry if that offends you if you're Christian, but it does. And history tells us that, and we need to recognise that it was a predated Christianity thing. Did Yule disappear? Not really. In many places, Yule simply transferred over and became part of Christmas. And that's why we celebrate so many of those same kind of things at Christmas time. Now, for us here in the Southern Hemisphere, we celebrate sometimes Christmas in July because we don't have a winter Christmas. For us, Christmas is barbecues, beers, prawns on the barbie, gift giving still, but it's summertime. We're out of the beach. We're for farmers, we're usually in peak production during Christmas time. So we don't have time to sit down and rest. So it's a little bit different in the Southern Hemisphere, but a lot of people celebrate Christmas in July as a Yuletime celebration. Now, Scandinavian countries, Christmas actually comes from the word Yule. It's something exciting that I worked out when I was doing the research for this one. Jul in Sweden, Jul in Norway, Jul in Denmark. And that's the Germanic, it was Jule for Yuletime. So people celebrating Christmas and they don't realise that they're actually celebrating what was once a pagan festival to celebrate the darkest night of the year and therefore the return of light the next day or in the coming weeks. From a homesteader's perspective, one reason that it resonates with homesteaders is because we get to focus on something tangible. It's a winter solstice period. We know that for us here in the Southern Hemisphere, the 21st of June is going to be our longest night. So we know that that's the case. We know that because we monitor how many daylight hours we have as farmers and homesteaders. Seasonal cycles, it's the dead of our winter, so we don't have a lot of stuff growing in the garden. We do have a lot of stuff that we've preserved or kept, from our garden during the summertime. The return of longer days, which is awesome. It's my favourite part of the year. I don't even care that July is cold. I just love that we get the longer days. And gratitude for making it through another year. I think that's a really important thing that we don't necessarily celebrate. And certainly in my family, we don't sit down. We do sit down sometimes. We celebrate Thanksgiving, even though we're Australian, because we had an American au pair years ago. And he encouraged us to celebrate Thanksgiving. And the kids loved it so much that we still celebrate Thanksgiving. They still celebrate Halloween as well. But we don't sit down often enough and be really grateful for things throughout the year. So Yuletime is a great time to do that, to sit down and kind of round the table say, who's grateful for what this year? What's been good about this winter? But family, food and community. Now, those themes existed long before Christianity and they will continue for a long time into the future. Whether you celebrate as a Christian or whether you celebrate as a pagan or whether you celebrate as some other religion, Christmas and Yuletime for farmers and homesteaders, I think, is a really important time. And because because in the Southern Hemisphere, Christmas is in December, which is summer for us, having a Christmas in July, I think, is a really cool thing to do. It just gives you an opportunity to participate in those kind of traditions. Excuse me. So Christmas absorbed a lot of the Yuletime traditions. Oh, sorry, folks. I just had to stop and have a little sip of water. I was coughing and didn't want to cough into the microphone. I'm still getting over the flu that I had a couple of weeks ago, and it's just that lingering cough that doesn't want to give up. So Yuletime gradually absorbed the midwinter celebrations from Northern Europe rather than completely replacing it overnight. But it is mostly about nature cycles. For homesteaders, it's things that we do every day, recognising sunrise and sunset times, seasonal changes, knowing when to plant out, when to start breeding animals, when animals are due to hatch, things like that. Weather patterns, when we're going to have longer, drier days rather than the wetter periods. Plant growth, when we need to prune trees and make sure that we've fertilised things to get a real good growth growing into spring. And I think homesteading really connects you with that seasonal way of life, even though we all live in a modern environment. So why Yule makes sense on the homestead. Modern life really ignores seasons. In modern life, you go into the supermarket and it doesn't matter whether it's spring, autumn, summer, winter, doesn't matter. The same food is going to be available. But on a homestead, if you are trying to ditch the store and trying to grow things yourself, you know exactly what season it is based on what you have growing in the ground and what your animals are doing. And winter means slower gardens, less egg production, having to use fire to keep your house warm. Usually things like soups and casseroles are more common to eat because you're using up root vegetables or things that you had preserved or stock, things like that. And a lot more indoor projects because it is hard to get out in the middle of winter and do stuff. And especially if you live in an area where it snows, it can be really, really difficult. So Yule is kind of like when we talked last week about chickens having their molt period and having annual leave. Yule also gives humans a bit of a chance to have some downtime, some inside time, some quiet time to look back on things, to plan for what's coming in the future. So there's a couple of questions that you could probably sit down and journal. And I don't journal enough. I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then I do it for like a week, and then something happens and I get busy and it doesn't happen. But I'm going to try, especially while I'm still recovering with my broken leg, I'm going to try to do some of this year. So questions to ask yourself in this winter kind of phase when you're not outside as much. What worked this year? What failed this year? What did you learn this year? And what are you grateful for this year? I think if you ask yourself those things, you can kind of set yourself up for planning for the spring and summer months a bit better. And just remember that if you are having that downtime through the middle of winter, it's not laziness. It's actually part of a rest cycle. And, certainly humans in the past didn't go out and do as much in those winter months as what they do in spring, summer, autumn, because that was our annual leave. That was our time to rest and recuperate and get ready for the next cycle. So one thing I wanted to touch on was the history of the Yule Log, because I love the idea of that. I love fireplaces. We have a fireplace. It's going at the moment because it's a bit cold in here, but we also have a fire pit out in the yard that the handy helper and I just never get enough time to actually sit down, light, and sit around with a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey. But it's one of the most famous Yuletime traditions, and it's one that a lot of people kind of recognise as a Christmas thing, is the Yule Log. Now, historically, what it was a large log was brought into the home and burned through the longest night. And the reason for having such a large log is because it had to burn all night through the longest night of winter. So that's what the tradition is about. It was there to represent warmth, protection, and light returning. That was the idea behind it. Now, sometimes families saved a piece of the log for the next year to start the fire. And that was like a bit of a tradition that, from last year, we still have this piece of wood that we're using to start the fire, which I think is a really cool tradition. Modern homestead versions would be things like a fire pit gathering, a backyard bonfire, and certainly in Australia, we don't light fires in summer because we are fire prone. It's a country that has a history of being fire prone. So backyard bonfires are common in winter in Australia because it's a good time that you can burn off piles of excess timber that you had that you're not using for firewood. You wouldn't want to do it in summer in Australia because the chance of it taking off and going elsewhere and then you having a fire hazard, an issue around your house is not great. Indoor fireplaces, if you've got an indoor fireplace now, it'd be a great time to light it. And having a decorative Yule log. And some people used to decorate them, so I think that's kind of cool. But it would be a cool family tradition to start. And there's other family traditions that you can start, like I said, writing down things that you're grateful for. It's something that I don't think we do it enough, and we need to really educate our kids to start thinking about that, thinking about the upside of things, not always the world is so hectic at the moment. Thinking about all the stuff going on, I don't think is helpful. And I've had I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's been a lot of people talking about, oh, everybody's struggling with the way the world's going. And I think, yeah, but you're encouraging that instead of saying, yeah, the world's gone to shit in some areas. You know what? Can you change it? Can you make an impact on it? Can you do anything to fix it? And if you can't, then dwelling on it and thinking about it consistently, I think is almost like feeding the karma that is that. Whereas if you turn around and say, no, I'm only going to think positively and I'm going to think about what I'm grateful for and what's been good and what's working, you might actually send some good vibes out into the environment. I don't know. I believe in karma. If you don't, take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's a good idea. You could also write down the challenges that you're letting go of. So things that didn't work for you and that you want to stop. Like for me, it's not thinking negatively. I say it to Handy Helper all the time when we're driving somewhere. He always goes, oh, we'll probably hit every red light. And I go, well, now we will because you just said it. How about you say, wow, isn't it cool? We're going to hit every green light, Yeah, it's just, I'd rather think of the upside, the glass is half full, rather than the glass is half empty. Also, a good idea to write down goals for the coming year. And it's a good idea to write them down so that you can go back and refer back to them, but also so you can plan for it and really kind of get moving with it. And then what some people do, and this is an old pagan thing, so if you are not interested in pagan stuff, don't bother doing it. If you are, what they do is they write down those things on a bit of paper and then place it into the fire that they have as their Yule time fire, their Yule log fire. It's simple, meaningful, doesn't cost anything. It's a great tradition to have. And even if you're Christian, you can still do it. It's, I don't think there's anything saying you can't kind of plan for those things, write it all down and then burn the paper as a kind of a symbolic way of saying, that's it, it's done. Now, seasonal homestead traditions that are practical and don't need to be expensive. Candle lighting. Candle lighting was obviously something that represented a return of light. And, in times gone by, it was because they were in the dead of winter and didn't have light and needed to light candles in order to do that. We have electricity, even those of us that are off grid like us. But lighting candles can be a really good tradition, and candles are inexpensive. Having a family meal where you use homegrown food if possible. Home-raised chickens, home-raised veggies, make bread, preserved produce that you've had, use that, just to symbolise that, that kind of gathering of family, like what you would do at Christmas time over a feast. Go for a nature walk. Now, as you might not want to do this, prior to the 21st, but you might want to do it after the 21st, particularly so that you can see that the days are getting longer. Notice the bare trees, notice any animal tracks, appreciate the frost for what it is. It's the downtime for nature, and coming out the other side of the frost is when everything grows again. And accept the fact that this is a seasonal change, that we are in the dead of winter, but we are going to come out into spring at the other end. You can have a planning session. Handy Helper and I like to sit down towards probably around July, usually around the school holidays. We like to sit down and plan out what's going to happen in the garden, any livestock goals. And I mean, this year we don't have any goats that are pregnant, so we will have no kidding this year. And the Handy Helper just mentioned the other day, if we don't have any goats kidding and we're not going to be doing milking, could we go on a summer holiday? Yeah, we might be able to. So we might plan for that this year. Family projects that need doing. We're doing an extension on the house at the moment, so we need to get cracking with that. But it can be as simple or as elaborate as you want, but it's a good time to sit down and maybe make some of those non-expensive, non-commercial traditions within your family. And you can also decorate your house. And this is something that obviously happens at Christmas time. For those of us here in Australia that celebrate Christmas in July or Yule time in June, this is a really good way of decorating that's not going to cost a fortune. So there's lots of things that you can get from nature that you can decorate your house with. Pine branches, obviously, pine trees they're evergreen, they're still growing. Gum leaves, we still have gum leaves growing. They don't drop their leaves. So, you know, pine cones. We go and collect pine cones anyway because we like to use them for different things around the house. Dried oranges. If you don't have any dried oranges, you can go and buy some. They're fairly inexpensive. Go down to the markets, get a couple of oranges and dehydrate them just in the oven. If you don't have a dehydrator, you can still use it. Cinnamon sticks. Obviously, things like cinnamon and nutmeg and stuff like that are things that we all associate with Christmas time anyway, the smells of Christmas time. Rosemary, lavender, and dried flowers. Make a little pot puree and put on the table, and you know, have those kind of scents in it. You can make a wreath or a table decoration or garlands out of those things, you know, to celebrate and kind of do your house up to celebrate Yule time. Just think all the things that you would normally see at Christmas time is what you want to be thinking about in Yule time for Southern Hemisphere people. But it's a good time to slow down and create rather than consuming. So decorating becomes the activity rather than, you know, having the decorations there that you bought. Actually physically make the decorations yourself. Now, food and feasting at Yule time. Historically, winter celebrations are around food. Sitting down, having a feast with family, that's what those kind of celebrations were. Because surviving another year was worth celebrating. And in some cases, surviving, having a productive year was worth celebrating. So some traditional themes that come up around Yule time are sharing, abundance, preservation, and community. And that's why some of those festivals that were celebrated in Northern Europe would be large gatherings of community, villages, things like that, where they would all celebrate by eating, drinking, having a bonfire. You know, there was probably music, there was probably dancing, things like that, that celebrated the community that they have in their village. So some homestead friendly ideas are slow cooked meals, roasts, soups, fresh breads, preserves, fermented foods, because, you know, it's the middle of winter, so you're not probably going to have as much fresh produce. And next week we are talking about fermenting, so make sure you listen in for that one. It isn't about perfection. It was more around gathering around the food and recognising the work that went into producing it. Now, reflecting on the homestead year. This was also a tradition that used to happen as probably one of the most valuable homestead traditions, Yule traditions rather, is looking back and saying to yourself, what worked best? So what was the best crop? What was the best livestock decision? You know, did you breed an animal or use a different bull or use a different buck and it made for better produce? What was your most successful project? Go through, write it all down, work out what did work and what didn't work and what you want to continue next year. Because the next thing you need to sit down and write is what didn't work. And this is important to go through too. There's no point, getting pissed off at yourself over what didn't work. Instead, use it practically to plan for the next year. So what were your failed garden ideas of beds or plants, or what didn't work in the garden? Did you have fencing disasters? We had a fencing disaster this year. We lost another goat this year. So we had another fencing disaster. So planning for that and knowing what you're not going to do next year is just as important as knowing what you're going to do next year. Animal escapes. We've just had to patch up a fence because Miss Poppy has decided that she knows how to jump over the fence now. And she's not very happy with us that we've patched up the fence and she can't get out. But we're happy that she can't get out because we know she can't hurt herself. And look, every homesteader has stories. I mean, we joke about it with goats. Any fencing that we do with goats, it's like Fort Knox. You have to prepare for the fact that goats will find a way to get out. Charlotte, who's one of our Angora cross Anglo-Nubians who I milked last year, she can jump over just about anything. It's like a gazelle watching her in action. So fencing around her has to be top notch because she'll find a gap. But some of the biggest lessons that you'll get will come from failures. And it's really, really important. Please don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, plan and go, okay, well, that didn't work. You know, I mean, my raspberry canes, I cut them back last year and they went crazy and I got no fruit off them, but it didn't work. So this year we need to plan for that. Do we need to fertilize better? Is there a bit? I'm looking at ways to cut back raspberry canes and make them work a bit better. So we need to plan for that this year. Instead of beating myself up about it, I'm just going, okay, well, what can I do better next time? And what do you want more of next year? So do you want more food? Are you going to grow more in the veggie garden? Which, like I say, I'm coming out of this broken leg phase for me, which has been a real nuisance as far as stuff on the homestead. But this year, we're hoping to get more of a veggie garden going with the things that we really want to grow, not the crap that we don't want to grow. More simplicity. You might want things to be easier. You might have taken on too much in previous years. You might want more family time. Certainly over summer, because we're not milking this year, we might have an opportunity to have a family holiday, which is going to be awesome. And more skills, learn, especially during winter. There might be things that you can learn to do that you can then take into the summer and spring months. And looking forward to the return of the light. So the reason that Yule exists, we have to remember that, is that solstice marks that turning point where we have got through the longest day of the night, longest night of the year, and we are coming out the other side. Once we've passed that longest night, every other night is gradually reduced, and it's only by seconds, minute, maybe at times. It's only small incremental changes, but every day after winter solstice, the days do get longer and you just notice it very gradually. It'll still be cold during July, but it is a turning point, and that steady increase in light makes it easier to start doing things outside. Even if it is cold, you have more time to do things outside. So it's a really good thing for homesteaders. It won't happen overnight. Like I say, they're very gradual, incremental changes, but that's how everything happens on the homestead. One seed at a time, one fence post, one loaf of bread, one different chicken, one new skill that you've learned at a time. And those things will increase that slow, consistent, and it might seem invisible at first, but you will get through it. So that's it for this week. Yule and Christmas isn't about buying things. It's about creating a bit of a celebration and recognizing where you are in that cycle. And it's weird for us here in Australia because for us, Yule technically, Christmas time technically, would occur in June. And we celebrate it sometimes in July, but Northern Hemisphere people celebrate it in December because it's the middle of their winter for them. But the longest night, what we have to come out the other side and remember is that spring is coming. It's the start of spring. It's like Game of Thrones. Winter is coming. Well, once we get past winter solstice, spring is coming. The garden will start to wake up. Hens will start laying more eggs. Days will get longer. The work that you do now with planning and preparation will impact you on the other side as far as getting things going and getting them moving. Don't forget, if you are after some homesteading resources and other information about homesteading, you can go to the website www.mojohomestead.net. I have got things there and I try and put stuff there that I've learned from because I've made enough mistakes. The handy helper and I are not perfect homesteaders or farmers by any stretch, but we certainly try our hardest. And certainly with our animals, we consider ourselves livestock farmers above everything else, and we try and keep them going. And we have learned, unfortunately, the hard way. We've lost animals. But I was just having a conversation the other day with somebody on a goat page, and she was talking about Barber's poleworm. And I said, I actually think we're now at a point where we know so much about Barber's poleworm that we are out the other side of it. We are not experts on it. There's some people in Australia here who are definitely experts on it, and I rely heavily on them for information. But I think we've finally got to a point where we understand what to do and what not to do and how to fix it. And it's a horrible, horrible parasite that causes such a big impact here in the southern tablelands of New South Wales. But for us, I feel like we've finally got to a point where we know enough about it that we're not going to have a problem with it again. And that's a really good feeling. So if you want to learn about stuff, jump on the website, have a look. If there's something that's not covered on there that you want to know about, feel free to DM me on either Instagram, Facebook, wherever you follow on social medias. DM me and ask me to cover it, because chances are if you're thinking about it, we may have already done it, and it may be just that I haven't got to it yet. So let me know and I will be happy to cover it and go from there. Anyway, next week, fermentation 101 we're talking, because I'm still learning and I like the idea of it, and I like the idea of having probiotics in your gut, and I like it not being out of a capsule form, because that's what I've been living on at the moment with all these antibiotics in my system. But we are fermenting. So talk next week. Bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us, or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.